A body lies beneath the silver glow of moonlight, and only Poirot can see the truth. Welcome to Shadow Files. I am your host, Kyle. This community amazes me. Comment where you're watching from. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. Let's begin. The autumn wind howled along the Sussex cliffs, carrying with it the restless roar of the sea below. Against this wild backdrop, Moonlight Manor stood in solemn grandeur, its tall windows gleaming faintly under the harvest moon. Within, light and laughter spilled from the great hall, though to the watchful eye it was clear the gaiety was painted over with something more brittle, a tension that hummed beneath every word spoken. Sir Alistair Worthington, master of the house, strode through the throng of guests with a glass of brandy in his hand and a mocking smile upon his lips. At 65, his hair was silver, but his eyes retained their steel, sharp and cold. He had invited only a dozen people for his birthday gathering, each bound to him in some fashion, by blood, by business, or by obligation. And yet, as often happened with Sir Alistair, gratitude was scarce and resentment plentiful. Lady Worthington moved elegantly among them, her silver gown catching the light like moonlit water. She smiled with dutiful warmth, though her glances toward her husband carried the weariness of a woman who had learned to laugh at her own expense. Evelyn Worthington, his daughter from his first marriage, stood aloof near the staircase, pale and stern, her gaze fixed not on the party, but upon the family portraits that loomed along the oak-panelled walls. Others completed the circle. Colonel Pembroke, stout and red-faced, boomed with laughter a shade too hearty, as though to drown out his creditors. Clara Redmond, the actress, spoke with her usual charm, but her eyes betrayed the bitterness of one who had tasted fame and found it slipping away. Felix Grant, the young protégé, stood always near Sir Alistair, attentive, watchful, his ambition worn like a fine coat. Dr. Bernard Ashcroft, the physician, joined every conversation yet gave little away, his reputation for discretion having grown fragile of late. And Mrs. Lydia Havers, the housekeeper, moved silently among them, observing, her loyalty as old as the house itself, and perhaps just as cracked. It was, to all appearances, a perfectly arranged evening. Yet the clock in the great hall seemed to strike its hours with an unnerving emphasis, each chime echoing as if marking down the steps to some inevitable conclusion. At 11, the laughter began to wane. Guests wandered, some to the smoking room, some to the drawing room, one or two to quiet corners where whispers carried the weight of confessions. Outside, the wind battered the windows with a steady persistence, as though impatient to be admitted. Then, as midnight struck, the house was ripped apart by a scream. It was high, piercing, filled with raw terror, and it drew every guest into motion. Feet pounded on the polished floors, voices rose in alarm, and all converged upon the library, where the heavy door had been left ajar. Within, the scene was stark. Sir Alistair Worthington sat slumped in his great leather chair, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his mouth half open as though frozen mid-protest. His eyes were wide and staring, filled not with peace but with horror. On the table before him rested a glass of brandy, half drunk, the amber liquid trembling faintly in the lamplight. No weapon was visible, no struggle disturbed the order of the room. And yet there was no mistaking it. Sir Alistair was dead. A chill silence fell over the company, broken only by the distant roar of the sea. The doors had been locked since evening. No one had entered. No one had left. And though none among them yet guessed it, the truth of what had happened within those walls would call for the keenest of minds, a detective who trusted not to chance nor to circumstance, but to the subtle patterns of human folly. Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, was soon to be summoned into the shadowed heart of Moonlight Manor. For a moment, no one moved. It was as if the house itself held its breath. Then Lady Worthington gave a small choking sound and lurched forward, clutching the back of a chair. "Alistair," she whispered, and on the second syllable the whisper broke into a sob. "Don't touch him," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, almost cold, and it cut through the rising confusion. "Dr. Ashcroft, please." The physician, who had hovered a pace behind the others as though unwilling to be first into the room, stepped forward with a briskness that felt practiced. He bent, set 2 fingers against Sir Alister's throat, then loosened the dead man's collar with a delicate reluctance, as if he disliked the intimacy of the act. "There is no pulse," he said after a moment. "He is quite gone." "What happened?" Colonel Pembroke demanded. The colonel's face had gone a shade paler beneath its habitual red. "Good God, Ashcroft, he was alive an hour ago. We were discussing—" He stopped himself and coughed. "A matter of some interest." "Discuss it later," Evelyn said. She turned to the housekeeper who waited just within the doorway, hands clasped in her apron. "Mrs. Havers, the doors of the house are locked." "As you ordered at 10, miss," said Mrs. Havers. Her voice had the controlled calm of someone used to storms. "Front and terrace doors both bolted. I checked the windows in the public rooms myself." "Then no one has come in or left," Evelyn said. "It was not a question. Not by the main floor, miss. The kitchen entrance is barred at night. Cook has the key on her ring." "Then we telephoned the police," said Felix Grant quickly. He stood just behind Lady Worthington, a little apart, as though between her and the rest. "We must. This is the only sensible course." "Do it," Evelyn said. Felix slipped away, and his polished shoes clicked in the corridor. The others stood, looking first at the body and then at one another with that expression people wear when they have been suddenly reminded that the world contains more than their own concerns. The wind pressed the panes. The fire hissed and settled. On the table beside Sir Alister's hand, the brandy glass trembled as though from the movement of the floorboards. "Do not, please." "Move the glass," Dr. Ashcroft murmured, and if the words were meant for everyone, they seemed meant most of all for himself. He sniffed the air, faintly. The decanter, he reached, hesitated, and drew back. Number best leave everything as it is. Clara Redmond crossed herself, the gesture half concealed by the fall of her shawl. "He was speaking to me not an hour ago," she said. "He told me, no matter." Her mouth hardened. "It is wicked to be killed in one's own house." "Killed," Lady Worthington repeated. The word trembled. "You cannot be sure." "If it were his heart," Ashcroft replied very gently, "his posture would be different. We will know soon enough." "Soon enough," Colonel Pembroke muttered, and stared into the dead man's eyes as if challenging them to look away first. Felix returned almost at once. "The line was poor," he said. "The weather, perhaps. But I reached the station. Inspector Nichols is coming from Seaford. He says he will be here within the hour." "An hour," Evelyn said. "Then we must keep the library undisturbed until his arrival. Mrs. Havers, shut the door, but do not lock it. Colonel, Mr. Grant, will you accompany me to the drawing-room? We must all go there together. Dr. Ashcroft, Lady Worthington, if you please." It was done with the smoothness of a woman who had learned, as a girl, that hesitation invites dispute. They filed out silently. Mrs. Havers lingered to cast one last look over the room, and if her eyes rested a heartbeat longer on the empty coasters near the brandy tray, no one remarked it. She closed the door. In the drawing-room, the mood shifted from horror to a skittering unease. The carpet muted their steps, the lamps made pools of light, and beyond the windows the black sea tossed silver spray against the cliff. Someone, perhaps without thinking, turned down the gramophone needle that had been left poised above a record earlier in the evening. The quiet that followed was almost a relief. "We will have to give an account," Evelyn said. She remained standing, hands clasped before her. "Where we were, what we did, and when we last saw my father. It is best if we are clear about it now." "Quite right," Felix said. "Inspector Nichols will expect it. Lady Worthington had taken the end of a sofa and sat very straight, as if a looser posture might make her collapsing inevitable. "Is it necessary tonight?" "It is necessary," Evelyn said, without unkindness. Colonel Pembroke drew himself up. "I have nothing to conceal." "None of us has, I hope," Clara said mildly. "But concealment and confusion are cousins, and we must avoid both." "Then you begin," Felix suggested. "You are the hostess." Lady Worthington started, then looked at Evelyn, who nodded once. "Very well," she said. After dinner, we had coffee in the salon. Alistair went to the library at 10:30. He wished, he said, to look over papers for the morning. I spoke with Clara until 11:15 about a charity performance in November, and then I went upstairs to my room. I dressed for bed and read. I did not leave my room again until I heard the scream. "Who screamed?" the Colonel asked. "I do not know," Lady Worthington said, and looked bewildered to find that she did not know. "I believe it was Cook," Mrs. Havers said from the doorway, where she had appeared with a tray of untouched tea. Her voice was quiet, factual. "She has nerves in bad weather." She told me later she let out a cry when the wind rattled the scullery window, but the second scream, after she heard Miss Evelyn running, that was mine. "I beg pardon." Evelyn nodded. "I ran from the landing when I heard the first cry. I saw the library door ajar and went in. He was as you saw him. I called for help." Clara began to speak and then stopped to smooth her shawl. "I went to the music room at a little before 11, she said. "Mr. Grant came in and asked me if the piano had been tuned. We spoke for 5 minutes, perhaps. He left. I played until the hour. Oh, and after. A little Chopin. Then I wandered to the conservatory. I may have been there 15 minutes. The wind makes it sound like a ship in a storm. When I came through the gallery, I heard the scream." Felix nodded, attentive. "That is so. I went from the music room to the study to telephone a colleague in London. I had mentioned to Sir Alistair a paper we are preparing, and I hoped to confirm a figure for him for the morning. The line was wretched. I could not get through. I gave it up at 5 to 11, I think, and joined Colonel Pembroke in the smoking room. We remained there until the disturbance. We were together the whole time. Save when you went out for matches," the Colonel said. "You were gone 2 minutes, no more." Felix smiled with professional ease. "Quite right, Colonel. I had mislaid the silver box. I found it on the hall table." "You smoke too much," Dr. Ashcroft said without raising his eyes. He had taken a chair by the fire and was staring into it with the fixed concentration of a man counting his thoughts. "I was in the south corridor, writing a prescription. Yes, for Sir Alistair. He asked me earlier to consider altering his dosage. We discussed it briefly after coffee. I wished to check a reference in my casebook. I did not see him again alive." Evelyn's gaze flicked toward him, but she said nothing. "And you, Colonel?" Felix prompted. "Smoking room from 10:45, the Colonel said. Spoke to Worthington before that on a private matter. Man was abrasive, but that was his manner. We parted at the library door. He went in, I went for my cigar. I can give you no more." Clara lifted her head. "Private matter? How intriguing." The Colonel bristled. "A debt, if you must know. He had promised to consider a loan. He enjoyed making me wait for a decision." He mimicked Sir Alistair's clipped tone with an accuracy that made Lady Worthington flinch. "Your fortunes, Pembroke, must be corrected by your habits, which are deplorable." "Thank you, Colonel," Evelyn said. "Mrs. Havers?" "In the servants' hall at 10, said Mrs. Havers. "Settled the day's accounts, saw the silver locked, checked the bolts. I went through the library corridor at 10:25. I did not look in. Mr. Worthington dislikes being disturbed when he works. I was in the kitchen with Cook from then until midnight." Felix's expression softened. "You see, we are all accounted for." "We are all accounted for by ourselves," Clara said gently, "which is not precisely the same thing." "Are you implying," Felix began. I am implying nothing, Clara replied. I am merely speaking the language we will be required to speak when the inspector arrives. Lady Worthington's fingers twisted in her lap. He was not well, she said suddenly. You all know it. The doctor has been adjusting his treatments. Could it not have been, she swallowed, natural? Ashcroft looked up at that, his eyes unexpectedly tired. He was not a well man, he conceded. But what I saw in there did not suggest a gentle passing. I would prefer to be wrong. Evelyn crossed to the window and touched the curtains as though to assure herself the fabric was real. This evening he was very much himself, she said. He had a plan to announce in the morning. He told me he meant to put the matter before us at breakfast. He enjoyed such little dramas. What plan? Felix asked, too quickly. I do not know, Evelyn said. He did not say. He liked to keep the last card. Clara's lashes lowered. He told me a different story, she murmured. Everyone looked. He told you what? Evelyn asked. That there would be changes, Clara said, smiling thinly. That is not a plan. It is a menace dressed for dinner. She let the smile fade. I'm sorry. I'm unkind when I'm frightened. Were you frightened in the conservatory? The colonel demanded. Why slip off alone? Clara tilted her head. Why did you go to the library? I told you. Precisely. We are all very honest, and yet something is missing. I can feel it. The room can feel it. It is like a draught that will not be found. Evelyn turned from the window. What is missing is my father, she said, and at that even Clara was silent. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. It was a light, decisive tread. Inspector Nichols entered with the inevitability of the next page in a book. He was a compact man wrapped in an overcoat beaded with rain. He inclined his head to the company, and to Evelyn especially, with a grave courtesy that did him credit. I am sorry for your loss, he said. I will need statements from you all. His gaze swept the room without lingering. Doctor, you have not moved the body? No. Good. I will examine the library first. Sergeant? A constable appeared at his shoulder as if conjured. Take names. The storm may worsen, and I do not wish to repeat myself in a power cut. He was brisk, methodical, and he missed little. Within minutes he had peered at the brandy, tested the windows, frowned at the hearth. He stooped by the desk and picked up a scrap of charred paper from the grate with a pair of tweezers produced from his pocketbook, only to let it fall back again when it disintegrated between the air and his intent. He returned to the drawing-room with a kind of careful disappointment in his face, as though the scene had refused him the courtesy of an obvious answer. It may be poison, he said, and did not look at Lady Worthington when she gasped. Or it may be that he died of some failure of the heart, hastened by the weather. I will not say more until I have my men and the doctor from the county. He turned to Evelyn. You mentioned the doors are locked? They have been since 10, Evelyn said. Mrs. Havers will confirm. Nichols nodded, thinking. He had the look of a man who trusted locks to keep honest men out and dishonest truth in. That means one of you or one of the servants had opportunity. Means little yet. He paused. He had enemies. Everyone did who owed him anything, Colonel Pembroke said grimly. Felix laughed, short and incredulous. Inspector, really? Really, Nichols echoed. He looked from face to face, weighing them in an old scale. I will need to speak with each of you privately. There is one more thing. You will remain in the house until I say otherwise. No one will leave, Evelyn said. We are at your disposal. Nichols acknowledged the promise with the smallest of nods. Thank you, Miss Worthington. It is not an accusation. It is order. The hour moved. Statements were taken. The storm thickened and made the windows groan. Somewhere in the house, a clock that was not the hall clock struck the quarter as if with its own opinion about human affairs. The servants passed quietly, careful to keep to shadows. In the corridor, the sergeant's pen scratched a line of blue across his notebook and paused only when the ink caught. And still, a sense of something not squared persisted, like furniture set a degree off from the wall. Inspector Nichols felt it. Evelyn felt it. Even Clara, whose business was emotion, felt it and became very still. The library had been too tidy, too calm. The brandy glass had trembled, but left a ring on the wood that did not match the single coaster beneath it. There were two faint circles on the polished surface, one recent and wet, the other the dry ghost of a glass removed. Nichols did not remark on it. He looked, noted, and put the fact away as one puts a card into a deck one does not yet know how to play. Near 1 in the morning, when the house had settled into the quiet of enforced waiting, Lady Worthington sent Mrs. Havers to Evelyn with a message. The ladies spoke in the small morning room, its walls papered with pale blue flowers that had faded almost to the color of smoke. "I cannot bear that man," Lady Worthington whispered, meaning Inspector Nichols. "He looks at us like objects in a cabinet. I want someone who sees people. Alistair once spoke of a detective. Foreign. Hercule Poirot," Evelyn said. The name surprised her with its steadiness on her tongue. "I met him at a charity luncheon. He is—" She searched for a word that would convey the exactness of the impression without seeming to praise the need for it. "He is very particular." "Could we ask him to come?" Lady Worthington pleaded. If there is the smallest chance that—" Evelyn's eyes softened. She had not wept yet. It was a point of pride with her not to do so where anyone could see. "There is the smallest chance of most things," she said, "and the largest chance that we shall require every advantage we can borrow." She was silent a moment. "Mr. Grant will say it is an insult to the inspector. He may be right. Let him be right." They returned to the drawing-room where Nichols was finishing with Clara. Evelyn explained with a composure that registered to Nichols as another fact for his ledger. He listened, and his mouth thinned, not in disapproval but in calculation. "I know the name," he said. "There are men who take offense where no offense is intended. I'm not one of them. If Miss Worthington wishes to invite Monsieur Poirot, I will be glad of his counsel. I would be a fool to refuse help in a case like this." "Thank you," Evelyn said. "He is in London?" Nichols asked. "I believe so." "The lines are bad, but you may try." Nichols gestured to the study. "I will have a constable listen to the gale and make himself useful by keeping the wire steady." Evelyn went to the study, and Felix, after a fractional pause, followed her. He stood by the desk while she dialed. The rain rattled against the glass like thrown shot. "It may take time," he said. "It may," she agreed, and waited through the slow, obstinate pulse of the exchange. When at last the click came and the faintest of foreign voices said, "Hello," as if from a smaller, more orderly world, Evelyn closed her eyes just once and opened them again. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, and the words seemed to start to steady the room. "Forgive the hour. There has been a death at Moonlight Manor. We do not understand it. Will you come?" He came before dawn, while the wind still worried the eaves and the sea gnawed at the cliff with a patient, hungry sound. The motor car's lamps swung up the drive in two pale crescents and washed over the wet gravel. When the door opened, a small, immaculate figure stepped out, buttoned his overcoat with care, and stood for the space of a breath to settle his hat to a precise angle, as if the storm itself could be persuaded into symmetry. He was shown in by Mrs. Havers, who had the air of a woman presenting a chapel to a priest. "Monsieur Poirot," Inspector Nichols said, meeting him in the hall. "Nichols, Seaford Police. Glad of your help." Poirot bowed, his eyes shining with wakefulness that seemed incongruous at the hour. "The pleasure is mine, Inspector. Forgive that I make the little pause. A man must assemble himself before he looks at death. In this house, it is a house that asks for care. It has the look of a place that remembers everything. We've left the library untouched," Nichols said. "Body is found. Doors were locked from 10 o'clock. I've taken basic statements. There was a storm. Lines are bad. The doctor from the county won't arrive till morning." "And the household?" Poirot asked. "In the drawing room, dozing if they can," Nichols said. "Miss Worthington is steady. The others, well, we'll see." "Then we begin," Poirot murmured. "One always begins at the place where the life stopped." They went together into the library. The lamps had been turned low. Poirot raised one shade a fraction, only so much as to sharpen without harshness. He stood very still, looking not at the body at first, but at the room as one might look at a sentence for its grammar rather than its words. Then he crossed to the hearth, to the writing desk, to the table with the brandy, in a measured sequence that gave the impression of a dance he had practiced all his life. Sir Alister had not altered in death. He remained as in the small hours, head to one side, mouth faintly open, so the surprise not worn off his features. Poirot did not touch him. He made a tiny, regretful motion with his hand, and turned his attention to the table. The brandy glass, half drunk, stood on the bare wood. The decanter was an inch lower than generous men pour. Poirot bent until his moustaches nearly kissed the surface and, with the fastidious care of a cat examining cream, admired the circles. One wet, crisp, newly printed. Beside it the fainter halo of an older ring not made this hour. "You observed this also," he said softly. Nichols nodded. "There was another glass once. It is not here now." "Not here," Poirot repeated. "A thing that is not there can be very eloquent, Inspector. Tell me, who has handled this table since the alarm?" "No one," Nichols said. "My constable notes the positions. The glass trembled when people moved about. That is all." "Just so," said Poirot. He straightened a blotter on the desk by exactly half an inch and examined it through his lashes. The blotting paper was fresh. Someone had torn a sheet away roughly, leaving the ragged edge. He reached for a little fold of thin paper in his pocket and laid it on the blotter, then passed his hand lightly to raise an impression. An inverted smear of letters offered themselves stubbornly backward, reluctant to be read. He did not squint. He smiled. "A word that begins kul, and then it loses courage," he murmured. "How obstinate are letters. They try to be legible, and at the last moment they betray." "Clara?" Nichols suggested, frowning. "Ah, you leap," Poirot said with sudden gentleness. "Do not leap, mon ami. See only this. Our dead man wrote something. He tore it away. Some of it he burned." He went to the grate and, with gloved fingers, lifted a flake of char no bigger than a fingernail. It crumbled obligingly. And the rest he did not. Why? Because the idea changed. Because someone entered. Because he wished to keep the flame from carrying to the carpet. There was not a fierce fire. Look, the coal is sullen. It is as if the fire was made to eat only paper, not to warm a man. Nichols rubbed his jaw. "You can make meaning from very little." "I make order," Poirot said. "From order, the meaning offers itself, perhaps." "We shall see." His gaze drifted back to Sir Alister. He frowned minutely. "You said the doctor believes not a gentle passing." "He said the posture did not suggest it," Nichols replied. "Poison is the simplest answer. We'll have the county surgeon confirm." Poirot bent only so far as propriety allowed and did not sniff as a dog does. Instead, he looked at the dead man's nails, the cut of his collar, the angle of the chair. "Says he touched nothing." "A man who loves control," he said at last, almost to himself. "Everything placed just so, the inkstand closed, the pens in line, and yet the tie. See, it is a little crooked." He would not leave it so. Either he was interrupted or someone after did not know how to put back the small perfections. "You've met him?" Nichols asked, surprised. "I have met many men who command," Poirot said. "They are alike in the little ways, though not in the big. The handkerchief that is folded and not merely pushed. The shoes that are shined even for solitude. Eh bien." He looked once more at the brandy. "We will seal the decanter, the glass. You have collected the cups in the drawing-room?" "They're set aside," Nichols said. "Policeman's tape, labels. I'm old-fashioned, but not careless." "Pas du tout," said Poirot, and the commendation was sincere. "Now, before we tire the eyes, show me the door, the windows." Nichols obliged. The long windows were fastened with iron stays. There was salt pearl on the inside of one pane where the wind had forced a bead through a flaw in the frame. Poirot looked at it as a jeweler looks at a flawed gem and then nodded, satisfied that nature, and not man, had made that mark. The door latch he admired without touching. "Madame Havers," he called softly, and the housekeeper, who had hovered like a good ghost in the passage, presented herself. "You are the key to the house, I think. Tell me of the bolts." She told him, plain and thorough. He asked the little questions, the time she checked, the route she took, whether she had her glasses on, whether the dog, when still alive in the old days, had ever managed to nudge the terrace door with his nose. She answered without embroidery, and he gave a small inclination of his head as if to say, "I see how you are made." "And now," he said, "I will meet the family." They were gathered in the drawing-room in a tableau that would have been theatrical if it had been less sincere. Lady Worthington rose and came forward with both hands, extended as if to be guided across a street. Evelyn stood beside the mantel with the poise of someone who has spent years refusing to be toppled. Felix Grant, polished even by fatigue, moved half a step to place himself in a useful position between the women and the rest. Clara, in a shawl like storm clouds, had composed herself to a loveliness that would photograph well in sorrow. Colonel Pembroke stared into the middle distance, jaw set. Dr. Ashcroft was diminished in his chair as though his white collar weighed him down. "It is kind of you to come," Evelyn said. "I am Evelyn Worthington." Poirot bowed to her first, and what passed between them in that glance would not have satisfied a camera, but it did for both of them. "Mademoiselle, you do all with correctness," he said. "It is not easy. I condole with you." He turned to Lady Worthington and bowed again with a touch more flourish. "Madame, courage." To the room in general he offered a grave smile. "I am Hercule Poirot. Inspector Nichols is your guardian for the law. I am perhaps a guardian for the psychology. Between us, we will try to see what is true." Felix made a small, eager movement. "If we can be of any assistance, anything, you will be of the greatest assistance by being exactly yourselves," Poirot said. "It is a considerable favor to ask, I know. Most people do not like themselves very much in the middle of the night." Clara's mouth tilted. "We are actors by necessity, Monsieur Poirot. Some of us by profession. You will have no trouble with performance." "On the contrary," Poirot said pleasantly, "it is the performances that are interesting." His eyes rested on her 1 second longer than politeness required, then moved on. "You will forgive that I ask the tiny questions now before the big ones in the morning. Madame," to Lady Worthington, "did your husband suffer from indigestion or from the little headaches?" "From headaches," she said. "He would take powders. The doctor prescribed." Poirot looked to Ashcroft. "Under supervision," Ashcroft said, too quickly for a tired man. "He insisted on working late. He was under strain. I made adjustments." "Ah," Poirot said. "And the adjustments were to be adjusted again tonight?" Ashcroft blinked. "He asked me to consider a change. We did not decide." "Bon." Poirot smoothed the air with his hand. "And Monsieur le Colonel, you spoke with Sir Alistair before he went to the library?" The Colonel's chin came up. "I did. About finance." "You were angry?" "I was. Provoked," the Colonel said. "He had a way of... You understand?" "I do," Poirot said, and the Colonel's shoulders sank a fraction. "Mademoiselle Redmond, one question only. Did you pass the conservatory on your way from the music room?" "I did," Clara said. I've always liked plants that pretend they are wild, even when potted. And in that glass house, what time did your watch say? She looked only briefly startled. 11:15. I remember because the wind struck the pane then, and I thought the sea had found us. Merci. Poirot turned last to Felix. Monsieur Grant, you tried to telephone at 5 to 11, and again after. He smiled when Felix's eyebrows twitched. I am told only little bits. I joined them. Yes, Felix said, recovering at once. The line was wretched. I gave up and went to the colonel. You are fortunate in patience, Poirot said. Many men would try again immediately, and immediately again. It is perhaps a modern virtue to surrender quickly. Felix flushed and then smiled as if invited to a jest. You may be right. I thought it best not to rouse the house over a figure that could wait till morning. Très raisonnable. Poirot folded his hands, and for the first time his smile reached his eyes. Now, I will ask something difficult. No one must leave. No one must write letters, even of condolence. The words weight better than people do. Sleep if you can. At 8, we will have the breakfast. At 9, I will speak with each of you alone. Inspector Nichols has the law. He will have also my companionship. He glanced around the room and, almost idly, straightened a cushion that had turned one corner toward the ceiling. I'm an old man, he said, and I like that the corners lie down. When they dispersed, the house seemed to exhale. Poirot remained by the mantel with Nichols, watching the last of them go, the colonel with a soldier's attempt at quiet feet, Clara with a floating back glance to see who watched her, Felix with a glance to see what Clara's glance had accomplished, Lady Worthington with the stiff spine of the dutiful, Ashcroft as if cold, Evelyn as if warmed by her decision to act. You've seen something, Nichols said under his breath. I have seen people, Poirot answered, and a table that speaks, and a blotter that blushes. He tilted his head. 2 circles on the wood, Inspector. 2 glasses at some time, but only one when the scream brought the world to the door. If I were a glass, I would ask, to what place did my companion go? Into a pocket, Nichols said, or the kitchen, or out of a window, or into the mind, Poirot said, where many things go to be forgotten. He laid a finger along his mustache. Also, there is a little blue on the thumbnail of our dead man. Ink. Yet the pen, see, has no stain. He blotted, he tore, he burned. He did not finish. Something interrupted him that was not a storm. Nichols regarded him with a respect that came easily to him. Tomorrow we'll have the doctor confirm poison. We'll search the servants' quarters. We'll look for a second glass in the scullery. You will do admirably, Poirot said. And I will ask the questions that have no warrant, only sense. For example, what announcement did Sir Alistair plan for the morning? The word on the blotter begins Kiel dash. It may say Claus, it may say Clara, it may say Cliff. We will not be so obliging as to choose too soon. You think the word matters? I think the intention matters, Poirot said. A man does not burn what he is proud to publish. He looked toward the dark and his voice softened. It is a curious thing, Inspector. There are murders that are like accidents with human faces, and there are murders that are like performances, rehearsed and costumed. This one, he rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, feeling the air, has the smell of a rehearsal. We will see tomorrow if the actors remember their lines. He slept for 3 hours in a guest room Mrs. Havers prepared, so neatly made that he adjusted nothing. At 7, he woke, shaved, polished the already polished, and ate a small breakfast in the morning room where the wallpaper flowers were pale enough to forgive any sorrow confided in front of them. At 9, as promised, he was ready, with little notebooks that he would fill and refill and then ignore when his memory proved the surer instrument. Evelyn came first. He did not ask her for alibis. He asked her for the shape of the day, her father's temperament, the undercurrents, the way the servants had moved, the sound of the house when it is content and when it is not. She told him without embroidery. When she had finished, he said only, "Merci, mademoiselle," and she left with a steadier step. Felix came next, smiling, willing, neat. Poirot set him at ease, then upset that ease with a single question that was not on the inspector's list. "When you did not get through to London, did you consider using another telephone? There is often a second instrument in such a house." Felix blinked. No. I assumed." "Just so," Poirot said. "You assumed. It is a small thing. But I like to know when people assume." Clara followed, with charm as a veil and intelligence as the face beneath. Poirot asked about voices, about echoes, about whether the wind in the conservatory had frightened her because of sound or because of thought. She laughed softly and said, "Both," and he believed her. Colonel Pembroke came like a man to be measured for a uniform he no longer wore. Poirot asked him of pride and of the price of pride. The colonel answered with more honesty than comfort. Dr. Ashcroft arrived smelling faintly of a medicinal sweetness that Poirot did not name. He asked about powders and schedules and what it does to the mind, to be the hand that can help and the hand that can harm. Ashcroft's eyes met his and looked away. Lady Worthington came last, hands tight in one another, as if to keep them from saying what she would not. Poirot was gentle. He did not ask what she could not tell, only what she could. The knock that was like no other knock on her husband's door. The sigh the house made when he went to the library. The way she had learned to live with a man who was the weather in every room he entered. When the hour had turned and all had been seen, Poirot returned to the library alone. He stood in the doorway and let the room return to him. Then he went to the desk and drew a breath as one does before picking up a delicate thread. On the blotter, the faint reversed letters waited with their little secret. On the table, the single glass stood like a sentinel for an absent companion. In the grate, the ashes lay like a map of a country that had been quickly and poorly erased. The truth was in these small misalignments. He felt it. Someone had taken great trouble to keep everything ordinary, and had failed by the width of a coaster. He smiled then, not with satisfaction, but with recognition. The performance had begun long before the scream. He would wait, and he would watch, and he would let the actors play. When the time came, he would tidy the scene with the smallest of gestures, and everything, down to the corners of the cushions, would lie as it ought. The storm had abated by morning, leaving Moonlight Manor crouched in a sullen grey light. The sea, restless still, heaved and sighed against the cliff, and the house seemed to absorb the sound into its walls. In the dining room, the air was heavy with silence as the company gathered for breakfast. The silver covers gleamed on the sideboard, but few plates were touched. A footman moved soundlessly, setting down dishes that went unheeded. Poirot entered late, with Nichols at his side. His moustaches were immaculate, his boots gleamed, and his demeanor carried with it the composure of one who has already ordered his day down to the last detail. He greeted each guest in turn with a little bow, then seated himself at the head of the table as though it had been reserved for him all along. "I thank you for your patience," he said, folding his napkin. "We have begun to make the picture a little clearer, though it is not yet framed. You will forgive that I eat, for the little grey cells, they require nourishment. Coffee, madame, if you please." He smiled at Lady Worthington, who nodded absently to the footman. Inspector Nichols cleared his throat. "I've spoken with the county surgeon. He will arrive this afternoon to confirm the cause of death. Until then, we hold the assumption of poison. It is neat and it fits the scene." Poirot tapped the rim of his coffee cup with one delicate finger. "Neatness, Inspector, is often the most untidy of things. When everything seems too simple, one must look to what has been overlooked." There was a stir around the table. Felix Grant leaned forward, seizing the moment. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive me, but surely you will tell us if you suspect someone? This atmosphere of uncertainty is intolerable." Poirot regarded him with mild amusement. "Monsieur, It is precisely uncertainty that keeps men from making mistakes. When one is certain too soon, one blinds oneself. I prefer the clear sight. Felix flushed and looked down at his plate. Clara Redmond gave a low laugh, brittle at the edges. Then we must endure it, I suppose. Suspense is fashionable this season, though rarely so personal. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward her, sharp as glass. This is not a play, Miss Redmond. Everything is a play, Clara replied softly. Some of us simply learn our lines better than others. Colonel Pembroke thumped his hand on the table. We'd do better with fewer riddles. If it was poison in the brandy, then one of us put it there. That's plain enough. Plain, yes, Poirot said gently. But too plain. Why poison when there are simpler means? Why in the brandy when Sir Alister's habits were well known? And why leave one glass upon the table, and not two? The colonel scowled. Two? Yes, Poirot said with a little nod. There was a second glass once. The ring it left is faint, but the table remembers. Someone was with Sir Alister in those last moments, and they do not wish us to know it. A ripple passed around the table. Lady Worthington gave a small gasp and covered her mouth. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her napkin. Felix shifted in his chair and laughed a little too loudly. Perhaps he poured a glass for himself earlier and then exchanged it for the other. A man may drink in more than one place. Poirot raised his eyebrows. Ah, monsieur, you are inventive. But this is not a man who leaves rings upon polished wood carelessly. Everything about Sir Alister spoke of order. If he made a mark, he wiped it. If he poured, he drank. No, the second glass belonged to another. Clara leaned her chin on her hand. And yet, that other glass is gone. Who would think to take it? Poirot smiled at her. Exactly, mademoiselle. Who indeed? Silence fell again, heavy and thick. At last, Lady Worthington pushed back her chair with a scrape. I cannot sit here any longer, to look about and wonder at each face. It is unbearable. She rose and swept from the room, the skirts of her gown whispering against the floor. Evelyn followed after her, calm but watchful. Poirot watched them go, then turned his gaze upon the remaining guests. It is in the nature of such tragedies, he said softly. They reveal not only who we are, but also what we wish to hide. I will speak to each of you again. But first, Inspector, if you will indulge me, we must revisit the library. The party dissolved reluctantly. Clara slipped away to the conservatory, humming under her breath. Felix excused himself to the study, muttering something about necessary correspondence. Colonel Pembroke stalked to the smoking room, his cane tapping with unnecessary force. Dr. Ashcroft lingered, then sighed and followed the inspector. In the library, Poirot walked slowly about the room, his hands clasped behind his back. He bent once more over the blotter, studying the faint, reversed impression. He traced the letters with his fingertip as though coaxing them to reveal themselves. Car, he murmured. It may be Clara. It may be Claus. It may be Cliff. But above all, it is unfinished. Why unfinished? Because the mind was distracted. Either he was interrupted or he thought better of his choice. In either case, it is important. Nichols rubbed the back of his neck. Could be Clara. He was writing her name, maybe. That would be motive enough. Poirot gave a small smile. Ah, Inspector, you are eager for solutions. But tell me, if a man intends to accuse his enemy in writing, does he tear the paper away and burn it? Does he not leave it proudly upon the desk as his testament? Non. This was no accusation. It was something else. A note, perhaps. An instruction, or even a secret. At that moment, Mrs. Havers appeared in the doorway. Her expression was tight, but she spoke with composure. Monsieur Poirot, Miss Worthington asks that you join her in the morning room when you are ready. Lady Worthington is unwell. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, madame. I will come presently." When he arrived, Evelyn was standing by the window, gazing out at the sea. Lady Worthington reclined upon a chaise, pale and trembling. Evelyn turned, her composure flawless. "My stepmother is overcome. I thought it best to remove her from the others. The inspector is not kind in his questions." Poirot bowed slightly. "It is well done, mademoiselle. Sometimes the truth is coaxed better by gentleness than by force." He glanced at Lady Worthington, whose hands twisted in her lap. "Madame, forgive me, but I must ask. Last night, did your husband speak to you of any matter of consequence? Any intention for the morning?" She shook her head quickly. He said nothing. He was irritable. He complained of his head. That is all." Poirot's gaze lingered a moment longer, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned to Evelyn. "And you, mademoiselle, you told me last night that he had a plan to announce." "Yes," she said, her voice low. "He told me so. He said only that things would change. That was all." Poirot tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Change. It is a word that frightens as well as excites. Perhaps he meant change of fortune? Change of inheritance?" Lady Worthington's head jerked up, her eyes wide with sudden fear. Evelyn remained composed, though her lips tightened. "I thank you," Poirot said softly. "It is enough for now. Rest, madame. And you, mademoiselle, you have the courage. Do not spend it all at once." He left them then and returned to Nichols, who was pacing the corridor. "She knows something," Nichols said. "The daughter, I mean. She's holding back." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "But holding back is not always concealment. Sometimes it is protection." He glanced toward the drawing room. "Come, Inspector. It is time we see how the others behave when confronted with the possibility that Sir Alister's plan concerned them." They found Clara in the conservatory, standing amid the dripping fronds of ferns. She turned at their approach, her eyes bright, her shawl clutched tight about her. "You look like the priest and the hangman," she said lightly. "Which of you is which, I wonder?" Poirot inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, forgive the intrusion. You knew Sir Alister well." "Well enough," she said. "He was fond of theatre. He liked to keep an audience waiting, but I never believed he would keep me waiting forever." "You expected something from him?" Poirot asked. She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "We all expect something, don't we? Some expect money, some expect freedom, some expect ruin. As for me, I expected only recognition. A small part in his will, perhaps. He owed me that much." Poirot raised his brows. "Owed you, mademoiselle?" Her smile was sharp. "I gave him my youth, monsieur. That is not a small debt." Nichols shifted uncomfortably, but Poirot only nodded. "Merci. You are candid. It is useful." They left her there and went to the smoking room, where Colonel Pembroke sat with his cigar clamped between his teeth. He looked up with a glare. "You'll find nothing here, Poirot. Yes, I owed the man money. Yes, he enjoyed tormenting me with it. But poison. If I'd wanted him gone, I'd have chosen a cleaner method. A pistolet. A duel. Not brandy." Poirot studied him carefully. "And yet, monsieur, when a man is desperate, he chooses what is at hand. You were alone long enough, perhaps, to slip into the library." The colonel's fist struck the arm of his chair. "I never left this room." Poirot's gaze flicked toward the ashtray. "And yet your cigar is shorter than a half-hour's smoke. Someone trimmed it. Was it you, Colonel? Or did another borrow the room? In your absence?" The colonel blanched, then recovered with a growl. "I stepped out for matches. 2 minutes only." Poirot's eyes gleamed. 2 minutes may suffice for very much. At last they spoke with Dr. Ashcroft. The physician was weary, his hands trembling slightly. "You are looking at me as if I were the executioner," he muttered. "Yes, I prescribed his powders. Yes, I adjusted them. but I would not kill him. He was difficult, but he was also my patient. A doctor does not—" He broke off and pressed a hand to his brow. He had enemies enough without me. Poirot regarded him kindly. "Sometimes, doctor, it is precisely those who are nearest who feel the greatest burden. Do not be troubled. I do not accuse. I merely observe." As the morning wore on, the house grew tense with expectation. Poirot moved through it like a man tuning an instrument, listening for the discordant note. Everywhere he looked, he saw the little details: the scuff on Felix's shoe that did not match the gravel of the drive, the faint perfume clinging to Clara's shawl though she claimed to have been alone, the tremor in Lady Worthington's hand whenever inheritance was mentioned. At last, as noon approached, Poirot returned to the library. He stood alone once more before the desk, gazing at the blotter, the ashes, the solitary glass. Then he spoke aloud, softly but firmly, as though addressing an invisible companion. "You wished to change everything, did you not, mon cher Alistair? And in wishing it, you signed your own death warrant. One among them could not allow the change. Which one?" "Ah, that is the question. But the answer, it is already here. It is in the room, in the glass that is missing, in the word that was not finished, in the little lies told with too much care." He touched the edge of the blotter with one fingertip, then smiled faintly. "Patience. The play is not yet done. The actors are nervous, the stage is set. Soon, very soon, they will reveal themselves." The sky had cleared by afternoon, a pale autumn sun glinting weakly on the wet stone of Moonlight Manor. The house itself, however, seemed no less shadowed. Its corridors carried the weight of whispers. Servants passed silently, their steps measured as though afraid to stir something darker that lurked beneath the silence. In the library, the curtains had been drawn back to let in the light, yet even there the air felt stale, as though memory itself clung too stubbornly to the room. Poirot stood with Inspector Nichols at the hearth, his eyes following the way the sunlight touched the brandy glass and struck a faint gleam from its rim. His little grey cells, as he so often described them, were already busy. He had spoken with each guest once, but now came the task he relished: to place them under subtle pressure, to test the seams of their composure, and to see where their words did not agree with their natures. "Inspector," he murmured, "there is something about a lie. It must be rehearsed like the lines of a play, but the truth, it needs no rehearsal. When I ask my questions again, let us see who falters." Nichols grunted assent. He was not a man to play mind games, but he had learned enough in the past day to know Poirot's odd methods bore fruit. Together they summoned Colonel Pembroke first. The colonel entered, blustering, though fatigue had made his eyes bloodshot. He dropped heavily into the leather chair before Poirot, as if expecting interrogation to be an ordeal that one endured like a battlefield skirmish. "Colonel," Poirot began mildly, "last night you told us you had spoken with Sir Alistair before he went to the library. You described the subject as a private matter of finance. Permit me to ask again, what precisely was discussed?" Pembroke shifted. "I told you, it was a loan. My finances are stretched. He had the means to assist me, and I sought to appeal to him." Poirot's gaze was gentle but unyielding. "And did he promise you this assistance?" The colonel's mouth twisted. "He promised nothing. He preferred to enjoy my humiliation. He told me perhaps at breakfast he would declare his decision." "Ah," Poirot said softly. "The breakfast, always the breakfast. It is a curious thing, n'est-ce pas, Inspector? Sir Alistair promised each of you something at breakfast, yet he did not live to eat it. A coincidence." The colonel's fists clenched. "Are you implying—" "I implying nothing. I listen." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "One detail only, Colonel. When you left him, did you see a second glass of brandy?" Pembroke blinked, then shook his head. "Number only his own." "Merci," Poirot said. "That's all for now." The colonel lumbered out, muttering. Nichols gave Poirot a sharp look. "You saw something then?" I saw what was not seen, Poirot replied. That, my friend, is often the greater clue. Next came Clara Redmond. She swept in with her shawl draped artfully over one shoulder, her beauty deliberately arranged despite the sleepless night. Her smile was brittle, yet her eyes sparkled with a peculiar light, as though danger exhilarated her. "Madame," Poirot greeted, "you are most patient with my questions. I will trouble you with a few more. You said you were in the music room, then the conservatory. Tell me, the time. It was 11:15, yes?" "Yes," Clara replied smoothly. The wind struck the pane at that moment. I remember it clearly. Poirot inclined his head. "And you heard no sound from the library as you passed the corridor?" "Number, why should I?" "Why indeed?" Poirot murmured. "And yet you are certain of the time. But forgive me, mademoiselle. How did you know the exact hour? Did you carry a watch?" Clara hesitated, then smiled. "Why, yes. I glanced at the clock on the mantel in the music room before I left. I recall it distinctly." "Très bien," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "And one more matter. Did Sir Alistair ever confide in you? Did he mention this announcement he planned for breakfast?" Clara's lips curved. "He said there would be changes. That is all? Changes in fortune, perhaps. He never explained further." "Merci, mademoiselle." Poirot's voice was polite, but his gaze followed her as she glided out, as though filing her performance away in the catalogue of his mind. Nichols frowned. "She's slippery, too ready with her answers." Poirot twinkled. "Ah, but you see it also, Inspector. When one rehearses, one remembers too well. Did you notice? She claims the conservatory struck her as storm-tossed at 11:15, yet she also claims she saw the mantel clock just before. The distance from one to the other is not so short, and the minutes, they do not stretch so kindly. Already we have the inconsistency." "They called in Felix Grant." The young man entered briskly, every line of his suit in place despite the disarray of the night. He wore an air of smooth cooperation, but there was a tightness at the corner of his mouth that betrayed tension. "Mr. Grant," Poirot began, "you attempted to telephone London last night, did you not? You say the line was wretched." "Yes, I tried and failed." "And yet," Poirot leaned forward delicately, "you did not attempt to use the second instrument in the morning room." "Why?" Felix blinked. "I didn't think of it." "An ambitious man such as yourself forgets a second telephone?" Poirot asked softly. "It is curious." Felix forced a laugh. "I was tired, that is all." Poirot did not smile. "Perhaps. And Sir Alistair, he trusted you, n'est-ce pas? You were his protégé, the one who might inherit his business. Did he ever hint at what his breakfast announcement would be?" Felix hesitated a fraction too long. "Only that he was considering a restructuring of the company. I assumed he meant to name me as his successor." "And you were certain?" "Yes," Felix said, his tone sharpening. "Who else could he choose?" Poirot nodded gently. "Merci, monsieur. That is all." When Felix had gone, Nichols muttered, "That one is ambitious enough for anything. He looks at the world as if it were a table laid for his supper." Poirot tapped his mustache. "Ambition, yes, but motive alone is not enough. The question is, who feared what Sir Alistair would say at breakfast? Who could not allow the change? That is the key." Next came Dr. Ashcroft. He looked weary, his hands trembling slightly as he folded them before him. "Doctor," Poirot said kindly, "you are Sir Alistair's physician. Tell me, what medicines did he take last evening?" "Powders for his headache. I prescribed them." "And were they safe?" "Of course. Mild sedatives only. Nothing lethal." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And yet the brandy, could it not conceal the bitterness of another powder? Something slipped in when you were not watching." Ashcroft's face flushed. I cannot answer that. I did not prepare the drink. I only advised moderation. Sir Alistair rarely listened." Poirot leaned forward, his tone gentle but probing. "Doctor, you spoke with him after dinner. Did he appear troubled? Did he mention changes for the morning?" Ashcroft's eyes flickered. "Yes," he said matters would alter. He seemed determined, almost exhilarated. "I thought perhaps he meant to reduce his hours, to travel, but he would not explain." Poirot watched him for a long moment, then nodded. "Merci, docteur. That is sufficient." At last, Lady Worthington was summoned. She entered slowly, pale and trembling, her eyes shadowed with grief. Evelyn accompanied her, though she stood back, letting her stepmother speak. "Madame," Poirot said with courtesy, "forgive me. I must ask again, last night, did your husband confide in you?" She shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. "Number." "He spoke little to me. He was often harsh. If he had plans, he did not share them. I was his wife in name only." Poirot's gaze softened. "And yet you fear the change he meant to announce, do you not?" She looked stricken. "Yes. I thought perhaps he meant to disinherit me, to leave me with nothing." Evelyn spoke then, her voice cool and steady. "My father enjoyed keeping us all uncertain. It was his way." Poirot inclined his head. "Just so, mademoiselle. And perhaps it is precisely that uncertainty which ended his life." When the interviews were done, Poirot walked again through the house with Nichols at his side. He paused at the grand staircase, his eyes sweeping the gallery above. "You see, Inspector, each of them had something to lose, something to fear. The Colonel, his debts; Clara, her recognition; Felix, his succession; the doctor, his reputation; Lady Worthington, her security; even Evelyn, her control of the estate. Each of them waited for breakfast, but someone decided that breakfast must never come." Nichols frowned. "And the missing glass?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, that is the ghost at the feast. It will return to us, Inspector. Glasses are shy, but they do not vanish altogether. Somewhere in this house it waits, and when we find it, the truth will step forward." As he spoke, a cry echoed from the far corridor. Both men turned sharply. Mrs. Havers came running, her face white. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, it is Miss Worthington," she gasped. "She is gone. Her room is empty. The window is open to the sea." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "So," he murmured, "the play has added a second act." The cry drew every guest from their corners of the house like moths to a sudden flame. Footsteps echoed along the hall, doors flew open, voices rose in alarm. Evelyn Worthington's absence fell upon the household with the weight of a fresh calamity. The storm had quieted, yet the manor itself now trembled with unease. Poirot and Inspector Nichols hurried at once to Evelyn's chamber. The door stood ajar, the bed undisturbed, the coverlet smooth as though she had left no mark of sleep. One window gaped open, the curtains whipping in the morning breeze. Beyond stretched the grey cliff and the restless sea, glinting like hammered steel beneath the cold sun. Poirot moved to the sill, his head cocked to one side, his gaze not upon the dramatic void beyond, but upon the delicate details left behind. A vase of roses had been overturned on the table. A trail of water and petals led toward the window. A chair had been nudged half a pace out of alignment, as though moved hastily and forgotten. He bent, his fingers brushing against the rug. "A thread," he murmured, holding it delicately between thumb and forefinger. "Dark wool. Not from Mademoiselle Evelyn's gown of last night. And here you see, Inspector." He pointed to the sill, where a faint smudge of shoe polish marked the wood. The window was not her escape, but an illusion. She did not go out. Someone wished us to believe so. Nichols grunted, his eyes narrowing. "Abduction, then. Someone spirited her away while the rest of the house slept." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly, "but let us not leap. Evelyn Worthington is a young woman of resolve. It is possible she left by choice to force the drama to her advantage, or it is possible she was compelled. The truth will declare itself, but not if we assume too quickly. They returned to the corridor where the household had gathered, pale and anxious. Lady Worthington clung to Clara Redmond's arm, trembling, while Felix Grant paced with agitated steps. Colonel Pembroke stood grim, his jaw working, while Dr. Ashcroft dabbed his brow with a handkerchief. Mrs. Havers waited at the rear, composed, her eyes sharp. Poirot raised his hand, and the murmurs fell silent. Mesdames et messieurs, Mademoiselle Evelyn is missing. Her room was left as though she had departed by the window, but the evidence suggests otherwise. We must not indulge in panic. It is precisely what the guilty hope for. Each of you will remain where the inspector directs, and none shall attempt to leave the house. Is this understood? Felix burst out, but this is intolerable. First Sir Alistair, now Evelyn, are we to be prisoners in this mausoleum while some unseen murderer stalks us? Poirot's eyes fixed upon him, calm but piercing. Monsieur, it is better to be confined than to be at liberty with a murderer at your shoulder. You're all safer here, together, than scattered in fear. Colonel Pembroke growled. Safe? With her vanished into thin air? Mark my words, Poirot. This is no ordinary crime. There's devilry in it. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. But devilry is only human mischief in a mask. We shall see. Nichols took charge, assigning a constable to guard the archy front and terrace doors, while servants were ordered to search discreetly within the grounds. Poirot, meanwhile, beckoned Clara aside. Mademoiselle, last night you told me Sir Alistair promised changes. Did he ever speak of Evelyn directly? Her future, her inheritance? Clara's eyes gleamed. He spoke often of her. She was his pride, his steel. He said once she would carry the Worthington name as a sword, cutting away weakness, but lately she hesitated, her lips curving in a wry smile. Lately he hinted that she lacked warmth, that the estate required not only strength but charm. He enjoyed wounding her. Poirot nodded, thoughtful. And you, mademoiselle? Did you envy her? For she is young, and beauty, it fades. Clara laughed softly, though her eyes were hard. I am not so vain as to envy youth, but I envy certainty. Evelyn has always known her place, while mine has been precarious. You see, monsieur, Sir Alistair's favour was a fickle coin. I never knew if I was rich or bankrupt until he smiled, or frowned. Merci, Poirot murmured. He left her and crossed to Dr. Ashcroft, who lingered uneasily near the door. Doctor, you attended Sir Alistair faithfully. Yet now Evelyn vanishes the very night after her father's death. Did she confide in you, perhaps regarding her health? Ashcroft shook his head, flustered. No, she never consulted me. She was distant, reserved. My concern was always for her father. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And yet, doctor, last night I saw the tremor in your hands. A physician should be steady. Is it fatigue or conscience? Ashcroft's face darkened. Fatigue, monsieur. Do not presume more. He turned sharply and walked away. Poirot allowed him to go, his eyes narrowing. So, he whispered to himself, a conscience speaks, even when denied. By midday, Nichols' men had searched the grounds. No sign of Evelyn was found. The cliff below her window showed no disturbance. The sea had not claimed her, yet the unease deepened, for her absence felt deliberate, not accidental. Poirot returned to the library, pacing slowly, his fingers steepled. Consider, mon cher Nichols. Sir Alistair promised revelations at breakfast. He died before he could speak. Evelyn disappears before the day is half gone. Each act is timed, precise, theatrical. Someone wishes to control the stage, to keep the truth from being revealed. You think she knew something. Nichols asked. Poirot smiled faintly. I think she knew everything. They were interrupted by Mrs. Havers, who entered quietly, a folded slip of paper in her hand. Monsieur Poirot, this was found in the corridor outside Miss Worthington's room. Poirot took it with care. The note was hastily scrawled, the ink blotched, the letters uneven. It read only, "Do not seek me. Trust nothing." W. Lady Worthington gasped when it was read aloud. My poor Evelyn. She has fled in fear. Someone has driven her to this. Poirot studied the note, his brow furrowed. Inspector, observe. The handwriting trembles, but the strokes are forceful. It is not a hand in panic, it is a hand disguising itself, and the paper, it comes from the writing desk in the study, not from Evelyn's room. No, this is no farewell. It is a message, but not from Evelyn. Nichols scowled. Then who wrote it? Poirot folded the note carefully. That, my friend, is the question. But whoever did so wished us to believe Evelyn guilty, or gone. The play advances. The afternoon dragged on, each guest restless under watchful eyes. Felix prowled the halls like a caged animal, muttering of wasted hours. Clara lingered in the conservatory, her reflection caught in the glass as though she watched herself act. The colonel drank steadily, growling at any who approached. Lady Worthington wept softly in her chamber, while Dr. Ashcroft shut himself away, pleading exhaustion. Poirot observed all with calm precision. He noted how Clara's shawl smelled faintly of cigar smoke, though she had not entered the smoking room. He observed how Felix's shoes bore a trace of damp earth, though he claimed never to have gone outside. He watched Lady Worthington's tears fall too evenly, as though summoned rather than born. And he saw in Mrs. Havers's silent composure the quiet strength of one who sees everything yet speaks only when pressed. As dusk fell, the manor grew hushed again. Poirot and Nichols sat together by the fire in the library, the brandy decanter still upon the table, sealed and untouched. The inspector sighed heavily. We go in circles, Poirot. One dead, one missing, 6 suspects, all with motives, none with proof. Have you truly learned anything? Poirot smiled, his eyes gleaming. Mais oui, mon ami. I have learned that the truth is already among us. It hides not in the great gestures, but in the small. A chair nudged aside, a thread upon a rug, a note too carefully written. These are the whispers of the crime. When they are arranged, they will sing. Nichols looked doubtful. And Evelyn? Poirot leaned forward, his gaze intent. Evelyn Worthington is not gone. She is here, in the heart of the mystery. Whether she is prisoner, conspirator, or victim, that we shall see. But she is the key. Without her, the play cannot end. At that very moment, a knock sounded at the library door. A constable entered, breathless, holding something wrapped in a cloth. Inspector, Monsieur Poirot, we found this in the scullery drain. The cloth was unwrapped, revealing a crystal tumbler, its rim stained faintly with amber residue. Poirot bent over it, his eyes shining. Ah, he murmured. The missing glass returns at last. The room seemed to darken around them. Poirot straightened, his expression grave. Now, Inspector, the truth begins to step out from the shadows. Someone drank with Sir Alistair in his final hour, and someone sought to hide. It, the little grey cells they are most eager to know, with whom did Sir Alistair share his last toast? The discovery of the missing glass cast a long shadow across the manor, as though the sun itself had dimmed. Inspector Nichols ordered the tumbler sealed and sent for testing, but Poirot's eyes followed it with a strange intensity, as if the glass itself whispered secrets that only he could hear. He remained standing long after the others had drifted away, his fingers tapping lightly against his moustache, his mind already arranging the pieces of the puzzle. 2 glasses, he murmured. Always 2. One for Sir Alistair, one for the companion. But who was it that sat across from him, pretending friendship while holding murder in the hand? The answer lies not in the brandy, but in the psychology of the drinker. Nichols gave a weary sigh. Psychology will not tell us whose fingerprints are on that glass, Poirot. Science will. Mon ami, Poirot said gently. Fingerprints will tell us only what hands touched it, but why it was taken away, and why it was found in the scullery drain, that only the little grey cells may reveal. The inspector did not argue further. He had already begun to realize that Poirot's methods, however eccentric, ran deeper than simple deduction. Word of the discovery spread quickly among the guests, each of whom reacted in ways that betrayed more than they wished. Clara Redmond, when told, pressed her hand to her lips with theatrical shock, though her eyes glittered with something like fascination. Felix Grant grew pale, then angry, declaring that the servants must be responsible for such concealment. Colonel Pembroke merely grunted and ordered another drink, though his fingers trembled as he lit his cigar. Lady Worthington wept, murmuring that her husband must have been betrayed by one he trusted. Dr. Ashcroft retreated into silence. His shoulders slumped. Poirot observed them all, noting not their words but their gestures, the tremor of a hand, the tightness of a smile, the too quick denial. He spoke little, for silence, he knew, was the best prod to human indiscretion. That evening, with dusk gathering once more around the manor, Poirot requested all to assemble in the drawing-room. The fire crackled brightly, but its warmth could not dispel the chill of suspicion that had settled upon the household. Each guest sat rigid, waiting, while Poirot stood at the hearth, small and neat, his eyes moving deliberately from one face to the next. "My friends," he began, "there has been much talk of poison, of accidents, of despair. But I tell you, Sir Alistair did not die alone. He drank with another, and that glass has betrayed the companion's presence. Now we must ask ourselves, why was it hidden? What fear compelled its removal? These are the questions that will guide us." Felix rose abruptly, his voice sharp. "If you mean to accuse, Poirot, then accuse. This lingering suspicion benefits no one." Poirot raised a finger. "Patience, monsieur. Accusation is the end of the play, not the beginning. First, we must observe the rehearsal, and so I propose a small experiment. Each of you will drink, as Sir Alistair did, from a glass of brandy. Each of you will lift it, sip it, and place it down. In this I shall watch, for murder is not only in the act, it is in the memory of the act." There was a murmur of protest, but Inspector Nichols nodded curtly. "Do as he says. You've nothing to fear if you've nothing to hide." The footman brought a tray of glasses, and Poirot poured each measure himself with meticulous precision. One by one the guests complied, some with reluctance, some with bravado. Clara sipped daintily, setting her glass down with deliberate grace. Felix drank quickly, his hand shaking, then slammed the glass a touch too hard upon the table. Colonel Pembroke tossed his back with a soldier's nonchalance, leaving a wet ring behind. Lady Worthington raised hers with trembling lips and did not finish. Dr. Ashcroft hesitated longest, swirling the liquid before touching it briefly to his lips, his gaze fixed on Poirot. When all were done, Poirot moved among the glasses, inspecting them as if they were rare artifacts. He touched none, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Bon," he said softly. "I thank you all. You have told me much." "What nonsense," Felix muttered. Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but even in nonsense, the truth can be found. Now I must reflect, and you, mes amis, you must rest, for tomorrow we shall be nearer to the end." The guests dispersed reluctantly, suspicion heavy in the air. Clara lingered by the fire, her eyes fixed on Poirot with a mixture of admiration and challenge. "You play a dangerous game, monsieur. You prod at us like animals in a cage. But beware, animals bite." Poirot inclined his head. And yet, mademoiselle, it is always the caged animal that betrays itself first. Bonne nuit. That night the manor lay uneasy. Servants whispered of ghosts, of curses, of the sea demanding its toll. Guests lay awake, listening to the creaks of the old house, the sigh of the wind through the chimneys. In the early hours, a second cry rang out, this time not of terror, but of discovery. Poirot and Nichols rushed to the smoking room, where a constable stood pale and shaken. Upon the table lay a folded sheet of paper, weighted by a cigar box. Poirot opened it delicately. The writing was scrawled, jagged, but the message was clear. If you continue, more will die. Leave the matter. The truth is buried with Sir Alistair. Nichols swore under his breath. So now we have threats. Our murderer grows bold. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Non, Inspector. Our murderer grows frightened. It is when the criminal begins to warn that he reveals himself. Fear is always the clumsiest disguise. By morning, the house was in uproar once more. The notes circulated, whispers multiplied. Evelyn's absence loomed ever larger, her room still empty, her fate unknown. Some believed she had written the threat herself. Others whispered she had been silenced. Poirot gathered the household again, this time in the library. The curtains had been drawn, the body removed, but the air was still thick with memory. He stood before the desk, his hand resting lightly upon the blotter. "My friends," he said, "the drama advances. Sir Alistair is dead. Mademoiselle Evelyn is missing. A threat has been made. Yet do you not see? These are not separate acts, but parts of one play. Sir Alistair intended to reveal something at breakfast. He was silenced. Evelyn may have known too much. She has been removed, whether by her own hand or by another's, and now the threat is meant to delay me. But delay is not defeat. Already the little grey cells whisper the truth." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on each face. "One among you fears exposure so greatly that you would risk a second crime to conceal the first. One among you knows the meaning of the unfinished word upon the blotter. One among you shared Sir Alistair's final drink. Soon I shall name you, but first I must provoke the guilty into betraying themselves. That, mes amis, is the next act." Inspector Nichols muttered, "And how do you plan to do that?" Poirot's eyes sparkled. "By turning the stage against its actors. Tonight I shall call you all together again, and I will reveal part of the truth. Not all, only enough to stir the guilty conscience. Then we shall see who trembles, who protests too much, who cannot bear the pressure. For murder, Inspector, is never so clever as it believes. The human soul, it leaks through the smallest crack." And so, with the sun dipping low once more, and shadows lengthening across Moonlight Manor, Hercule Poirot prepared his psychological game. The household braced itself, unaware that the little Belgian had already set his trap, and that by the next night, the mask of one among them would begin to crumble. The following day dawned sharp and clear, the storm scoured away, but within Moonlight Manor the atmosphere was darker than ever. The household had eaten little breakfast, some only picked at toast, others refused food altogether. Tension, Poirot observed, was a most effective suppressant of appetite. Lady Worthington sat wan and pale, her handkerchief permanently at her lips. Clara Redmond toyed with her teacup in silence, though her eyes gleamed with restless fire. Felix prowled like a caged animal, starting at every sound. Colonel Pembroke looked stubbornly grim, puffing at a cigar even in the morning. Dr. Ashcroft, meanwhile, seemed to shrink further into himself, his eyes ringed, his hands unsteady. Poirot entered serenely, immaculate as ever, his moustaches waxed to perfection. He carried himself with the assurance of a man who controlled not the circumstances, but the interpretation of them. He bowed gravely to the company. "Mesdames et messieurs, forgive me that I intrude once more, but we are now at the most delicate part of our little drama. Soon the truth will step forward. But first, I must conduct a test of the nerves." Felix, unable to restrain himself, snapped, "If you have answers, Poirot, give them. This suspense is unbearable." Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, monsieur, suspense is most useful. It loosens the tongue, it sharpens the nerves, it causes the guilty to betray themselves. You will forgive me if I make use of it." He turned his gaze upon them all. "This evening I shall gather you together and reveal certain truths. But before that hour comes, I will set before you a question. Each of you must ask yourself, what change did Sir Alistair intend to announce at breakfast? Each of you knew he meant to alter the course of the future. Each of you feared it. Which among you feared it enough to kill?" The words fell into silence like stones dropped into deep water. Lady Worthington stifled a sob. Colonel Pembroke muttered something under his breath. Clara's eyes flicked toward Felix, and Felix, caught, flushed angrily. Poirot let the silence linger, then inclined his head. "That is all for now. You may reflect." He withdrew with Nichols at his side. When they were alone in the corridor, Nichols muttered, "You play them like strings, Poirot. But what are you truly after?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I wish to see who trembles when the music begins, mon ami. By the evening, it will be clear." The day wore on slowly, each guest pacing, whispering or retreating into corners of the manor. Poirot wandered through the house as though absent-minded, but every glance was sharp, every detail noted. In the conservatory, he observed Clara Redmond staring at her reflection in the glass, her hand pressed against it as if in a silent dialogue with herself. In the smoking room, Colonel Pembroke muttered curses over his debts, his glass of whisky refilled too often. In the morning room, Lady Worthington wrote a letter, only to tear it into tiny pieces when she saw Poirot's shadow in the doorway. Dr. Ashcroft spent hours in his chamber, his valise half-packed, as if ready to depart the moment he was allowed. And Felix lingered near the study telephone, attempting calls that would not connect. By dusk, Poirot had seen enough. He asked Nichols to assemble them all in the library, the room of Sir Alistair's death. The fire was lit, though it did little to dispel the chill of memory. The great desk, cleared now of ashes and brandy, stood like a silent witness. The household gathered reluctantly, unease palpable. Poirot took his place by the hearth, immaculate in his grey suit, his eyes gleaming. He let the silence stretch until it grew taut, until every heart in the room beat a little faster. Then he spoke, his voice calm and precise. "Mesdames et messieurs, I have told you that Sir Alistair did not die alone. He shared a glass with another. That glass was hidden, but now it is found. And I have told you also of the unfinished word upon his blotter, Xil dash. Today I reveal to you this. The word was not Clara, as some of you may suppose. It was not clause, it was not cliff. No, it was change. The faint outline is clear when one sees it rightly. Sir Alistair wrote of change, the very thing he meant to announce at breakfast." There was a murmur at this, some startled, some relieved, some uneasy. Poirot raised his hand for silence. "And what change, you ask? I do not yet tell you, but I know this. It threatened one among you greatly, enough that murder became the solution." Felix sprang up, his face flushed. "This is intolerable. If you know something, speak plainly." Poirot's eyes fixed upon him. "Sit down, monsieur. Your impatience betrays you. The guilty man is always eager for haste, but I prefer precision." Felix sat, fuming, while Clara smirked faintly into her shawl. Poirot continued, his voice deliberate. "Last night, a note was found. Do not seek me. Trust nothing. E.W. But I tell you, it was not written by Evelyn Worthington." The hand trembled in a manner that was artificial. The strokes were strong, too strong. It was a forgery. A gasp ran through the room. Lady Worthington clutched the arms of her chair. "Then Evelyn, where is she? What has happened to her?" Poirot bowed his head. That, madame, I do not yet reveal, but I tell you this. She is not lost to the sea. She is closer than you believe. Her absence is part of the play, and the play is written by the same hand that killed Sir Alistair. Dr. Ashcroft muttered hoarsely. But why involve her? Poirot's eyes glinted. To control the narrative, Doctor, to make us believe she fled in guilt, to divert suspicion, yet the very clumsiness of the deception betrays its maker. Fear makes forgeries. Nichols glanced around, his eyes narrowing. Poirot, you've stirred them enough. Who do you mean? Poirot lifted his finger, wagging it gently. Not yet, Inspector. The reveal must wait for the final act. For now, I merely say this. Sir Alistair's death was not the end. It was the beginning. Evelyn's disappearance, the threatening note. These are sequels, designed to conceal the true motive. And so I watch, I wait, and I observe who trembles. At that moment, a sudden crash rang through the house. All turned in alarm. A servant, breathless, entered the library. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, there's been another discovery. They followed at once, the household trailing in fearful curiosity. The servant led them to the wine cellar, its air damp and cold. There, upon the stone floor, lay Evelyn Worthington, unconscious but alive. Her wrists were bound, a gag pulled away by the servant who had found her. Lady Worthington gave a cry and rushed forward, falling to her knees beside her stepdaughter. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, dazed, then fixed upon Poirot. It was not the sea, Poirot said softly. It was the cellar, very neat, very contained. As I said, mes amis, she was closer than you believed. Inspector Nichols barked orders. Servants brought blankets and water. Evelyn, weak but conscious, clutched Poirot's hand. Her voice was hoarse, but firm. Monsieur Poirot? He tried to silence me. He said if I spoke of what I knew, I would join my father. Who, mademoiselle? Poirot asked gently. Who was it? But Evelyn shook her head faintly. Not yet. I must gather myself. Tonight I will tell you. Her eyes closed once more. Poirot rose, his expression grave. So you see, Inspector, the play advances to its climax. Our victim has returned to us. She has seen the face of her enemy. Tonight, the guilty will be unmasked. Nichols exhaled heavily. And if the guilty strikes again? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Then, mon ami, we must ensure the stage is lit too brightly for shadows. Tonight, all must be gathered. Tonight, the performance ends. The household dispersed in uneasy silence, the revelation of Evelyn's survival rattling each in their own way. Clara appeared shaken, biting her lip as though rehearsing a new part. Felix raged at the servants for negligence, his voice breaking with strain. The colonel muttered darkly that the game had turned devilish indeed. Lady Worthington wept with relief, clinging to her stepdaughter's hand. Dr. Ashcroft trembled so visibly that Nichols shot him a sharp glance. Poirot, meanwhile, walked calmly to the library once more, where the fire burned low. He stood before the desk, staring at the blotter, the ashes, the ghost of the second glass. His voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of certainty. Change, he murmured. Yes, change. That was the key. Sir Alistair sought to alter the fates of those around him, but one among them could not allow it. One feared it too greatly. And so, murder. But soon the little grey cells will arrange all. Soon the curtain shall fall. And with that, Hercule Poirot began to prepare for the final gathering, the last act of the drama that would reveal, at last, the murderer of Sir Alistair Worthington. Evening fell once more over Moonlight Manor, the third night since Sir Alistair Worthington's death. The storm had long passed, but the house remained under siege. Not by wind or sea, but by suspicion. Lamps glowed in every room, though their light seemed only to deepen the shadows. Servants spoke in hushed tones. Doors closed softly, as if to avoid stirring the air too sharply. In the library, the stage of the crime, Poirot prepared for what he knew must come. He had insisted that all gather there again, for it was in that room, he said, that the truth had been born, and it was there it must be revealed. The long table had been cleared, save for the decanter of brandy and 2 clean glasses, placed deliberately at its center. Poirot, immaculate as ever, moved them half an inch apart, adjusted their symmetry, then stepped back with satisfaction. Inspector Nichols watched him, arms folded. "You've arranged the scene like a theater. Do you mean to frighten them into confession?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Non, mon ami. I mean to remind them of the moment of truth. Murder is like a play. It leaves behind not only evidence, but also emotions. Guilt, fear, pride, these remain. Tonight we shall see which of them cannot bear the memory of this table." Nichols shook his head. "You risk much with these games." "Eh bien," Poirot murmured, "life is always a game, Inspector. Some play to win, some to survive. Tonight, one among them will lose." By 8 o'clock, the guests filed in, tense and restless. Lady Worthington entered first, her face pale, her movements fragile. Evelyn followed, walking slowly but with purpose. Though pale from her ordeal, her eyes were bright and resolute. Clara Redmond came next, her shawl draped dramatically, her lips pressed into a line that suggested both fear and defiance. Felix Grant stormed in with barely concealed irritation, his hair disheveled, his composure slipping. Colonel Pembroke trudged heavily, his cane striking the floor in steady beats. Finally, Dr. Ashcroft arrived, shoulders hunched, his eyes darting. They settled around the room, each seeking distance from the others, each watching Poirot as though awaiting a verdict. Evelyn sat apart, near the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Poirot began softly, his voice carrying with calm authority. "Mesdames et messieurs, tonight we come to the heart of the matter. Sir Alistair Worthington was murdered. That we know. Mademoiselle Evelyn was taken and concealed, to mislead us into thinking she had fled or perished, and a note was forged in her hand. All of this was done by one person in this room." The silence that followed was taut, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Poirot let it linger before continuing. "Let us return to the beginning. Sir Alistair told each of you there would be change. He promised his revelation at breakfast. For Colonel Pembroke, that change threatened to expose debts never to be repaid. For Madame Worthington, it threatened disinheritance. For Mademoiselle Redmond, it threatened the loss of whatever small place she still held in his will. For Monsieur Grant, it threatened disappointment, the successor's prize snatched away. For Dr. Ashcroft, it threatened exposure of irregularities in his prescriptions, and for Evelyn herself, it threatened her authority over the estate. Each of you had reason to fear what Sir Alistair would announce." Lady Worthington gave a faint cry, but Poirot raised a hand. "Courage, madame. We must look at things as they are, not as we wish them to be. Motives alone do not make a murderer. We must see who acted." He stepped closer to the table, gesturing toward the brandy decanter. "Sir." Alistair poured himself a drink. But he was not alone. The second glass proves it. Someone sat across from him, drank with him, and in that drink delivered death. That person then removed the glass and attempted to destroy it. But why? Not merely to hide fingerprints, no, to hide the fact of their presence. The murderer was one who could not be seen as the companion in Sir Alistair's final hour. Felix leapt up. Then it must have been one of the servants. Any of them could have... Poirot cut him short with a sharp glance. "No, monsieur, the servants did not share Sir Alistair's brandy. That was the privilege of equals, of companions, of family, and so the circle tightens." He turned his gaze deliberately to Clara. "Mademoiselle Redmond, you claim to be in the conservatory at 11:15. Yet you also said you checked the clock on the mantel before leaving the music room. The distance between them is too great. The times do not match. Your alibi falters." Clara flushed, her eyes flashing. "You twist my words, Poirot. I may have misremembered a minute. What does that prove?" "That you lied," Poirot said gently. "But lying is not always murder. Perhaps you feared being seen where you should not have been. Perhaps you had another meeting that night, oui?" Clara's lips parted, but she said nothing. Poirot's gaze shifted to Colonel Pembroke. "You, Colonel, admitted leaving the smoking room for matches. 2 minutes, you said, but 2 minutes is time enough to step into the library, to slip a powder into a glass." Pembroke's face darkened. "If I'd killed him, Poirot, I'd not skulk with powders. I'd have shot him straight and fair." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "and perhaps that is true. But bravado does not clear you." He moved to Dr. Ashcroft. "Doctor, your hands tremble, your conscience weighs heavy. You prescribed Sir Alister's medicines, adjusted his powders. You had knowledge enough to kill without leaving a trace, and yet your loyalty as a physician is real. You did not wish him dead, but you feared his threats to expose your indiscretions. That fear paralyzed you, but it did not make you act." Ashcroft sagged, relief and guilt mingling in his features. Poirot turned slowly to Lady Worthington. "Madame, you feared your husband would strip you of inheritance, leave you penniless. But you also feared him in life, his cruelty, his disdain. Murder requires not only motive, but will. And you had no will left. You're too broken to kill." She sobbed quietly, bowing her head. Evelyn reached to take her hand. At last, Poirot faced Felix Grant. "And you, monsieur? Ambitious, clever, certain of succession. Sir Alister told you nothing concrete, but you assumed. Yet you were not so confident, were you? You tried to telephone London that night to confirm a figure. You were desperate to be ready, to impress. But when you failed, your composure cracked. You drank. With him, did you not? You were the companion in that room, and when he told you of the change, that you would not succeed him, that another would take your place, you saw your future vanish, and so you ensured his did as well." Felix's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it, then forced a laugh. "You cannot prove that. You have nothing, only stories." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "But I have the psychology, monsieur. The missing glass was found in the scullery drain. Who but you, accustomed to the study and the business, would think to dispose of evidence in the servant's realm? Who but you, eager to mask your presence, would dare? And more, Evelyn herself has returned. She has seen the face of the one who silenced her." All eyes turned to Evelyn, who rose slowly from her chair. Her face was pale, but her voice was clear. "Yes, it was Felix. He came to me after father's death. He said I must keep silent, that if I told the inspector about the changes father intended, I would ruin everything. When I refused, he dragged me to the cellar and bound me. He said no one would find me until it was too late." Gasps filled the room. Felix sprang to his feet, his composure shattering. Lies! She hated me. She envied me. She would say anything. Poirot raised his hand. "Enough." Sir Alister wrote the word change upon his blotter. And what was this change? Not business, not inheritance. He meant to alter his will, to remove you, Monsieur Grant. He saw in you ambition without loyalty. He intended another successor. That is why you killed him. Felix's face contorted, rage overwhelming him. He had no right. Everything I did was for him, his company, his fortune, his name, and he would give it away to... He stopped short, realizing too late that his fury had betrayed him. Nichols stepped forward, his voice cold. "That's confession enough." He signaled the constables, who moved in to restrain Felix. As they led him away, Felix twisted once more toward Poirot, his eyes wild. "Damn you, Poirot! Damn your little grey cells!" Poirot adjusted his cuffs delicately. "It is not I who damn you, monsieur, but your own words." The library fell silent. Lady Worthington wept openly. Clara sank into a chair. Shaken, Colonel Pembroke muttered, "By God," under his breath. Dr. Ashcroft closed his eyes in weary relief. Evelyn, though pale, stood tall, her father's steel in her bearing. Poirot, immaculate as ever, looked around the room with quiet satisfaction. "You see, mes amis, it is as I said. Murder is not solved by the glass or the blotter or the poison. It is solved by the human heart, which betrays itself always." Sir Alister sought change, and it came, not as he planned, but as fate decreed. He bowed, his moustaches gleaming in the firelight, and so the curtain falls. The library was still when Felix Grant was taken away, his furious protests fading into the echo of the corridor. For a long moment no one spoke. The guests sat as if stunned, each lost in their own reflections. Clara staring into the fire with the stage-struck stillness, Lady Worthington weeping softly behind her handkerchief, Colonel Pembroke smoking grimly as though the cloud of tobacco might shield him from shame. Evelyn alone remained upright, her eyes fixed on Poirot with gratitude and something like awe. Inspector Nichols broke the silence first. "Well, Poirot, you've done it. I had my doubts at the start, but you've stitched it all together neatly. The glass, the note, the missing girl. God help me, it all makes sense." Poirot inclined his head modestly. "Merci, Inspector. But the truth, it is always neat once it has been arranged. Before, it appears tangled, like the threads of a tapestry seen from behind. One must simply turn it around." Clara stirred, her voice low. "So it was Felix all along. I thought—" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "You thought it might be yourself," Poirot suggested gently. "Mademoiselle, fear makes us doubt even our own hearts. But you wished only for recognition. Ambition is not always murder." Lady Worthington lifted her tearful face. "And what of Evelyn? She was so nearly lost to us. Had you not found her?" Poirot turned to the young woman. "Mademoiselle Evelyn is strong, like her father's steel, but tempered with compassion. She endured, and in enduring she brought us to the truth. It was her courage that made Felix desperate, for he knew she would not be silenced by words. He bound her, he hid her, but even then the truth escaped through the cracks in his lies." Evelyn's lips tightened. "He said my father was wrong to trust me, that I had no place in the future of the company, but it was not about me, was it? It was about him, his ambition, his pride." "Just so," Poirot said softly. "Your father intended to make a change. To remove Felix from succession. He saw the flaw in the young man's nature, the hunger without loyalty. He meant perhaps to choose you, or perhaps another altogether. But Felix could not bear the thought of being denied. And so, he killed the very man who had raised him." Colonel Pembroke ground out his cigar. "A damn fool's crime. He's destroyed everything he wanted to possess." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "So often it is so, Colonel. The criminal believes he plays the clever game, yet in truth he destroys the very prize he covets. The psychology, it is always the same." Nichols nodded. "And the poison. You never told us how it was done." "Ah," Poirot said, smiling faintly. "That was the simplest of all?" Felix slipped a soluble powder into the second glass, then raised his own in a false toast. Sir Alister, distracted by his papers, took the poisoned glass, believing it his own. Felix drained the harmless one. After the deed he hid the incriminating tumbler, but the table betrayed him. The second ring left behind. It was a small clue, but the small clues, they are everything. A hush followed his words. The fire cracked and settled. Outside, the sea roared faintly against the cliffs, eternal and indifferent. At last, Evelyn rose. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, You have given me back my life. My father's death still weighs heavy, but at least now I may carry his name without the stain of suspicion. You have my gratitude." Poirot bowed. "Mademoiselle, I have done only what must be done. The truth, it is a debt we owe to the dead. Without it, there can be no peace." Lady Worthington clasped her stepdaughter's hand. For the first time, Evelyn did not draw away. Clara, silent still, looked at the two women with something like longing. Colonel Pembroke muttered that he would never drink brandy again. Dr. Ashcroft sighed, shoulders easing as though released from a burden too long borne. Nichols gathered his notes, shaking his head. "I'll write this one up for the record, but no one will believe it. A murder unraveled not by fingerprints or tests, but by the psychology of the deed, by the order of glasses on a table." Poirot's mustaches twitched upward. "Ah, Inspector, you see now the great truth. The little grey cells, they are the true detectives. Science is useful, yes. But human nature, it is constant. Men may lie, but their hearts, their habits, their fears, they speak louder than words." He rose, brushing an invisible speck from his cuff, and looked once more around the room. "And so, mes amis, our play is ended. Sir Alistair lies in peace, his murderer is revealed, and the rest of you, you may step out of the shadow of suspicion. But remember this, change is always dangerous. It reveals the truth of character more swiftly than any test. For some, it inspires courage. For others, crime." With that, Poirot adjusted his hat, perfectly centered, and moved toward the door. Nichols followed, but paused to glance back at the assembled company. A family bruised, a household shaken, but at last freed from the weight of uncertainty. Poirot, already in the hall, called back over his shoulder, "Come, Inspector." "There is no more to be done. The sea will continue its roaring, the cliffs their crumbling, but here, in this house, order has been restored. And order, as you know, is everything." And with a final, satisfied gleam in his eye, Hercule Poirot departed Moonlight Manor, leaving behind him the echo of his triumph and the quiet certainty that justice, once again, had been served.